Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a historic show for you today. Briahna, what do we have?
Well, with that lead-in, we'll discuss Biden's student debt cancellation with a special panel. I'm excited about that. And Alec Katsanis weighs in on the brutal Arkansas police beating.
But first, a group of families of the victims and survivors of the Uvalde shooting at Robb Elementary are filing a class action lawsuit that seeks $27 billion in damages that will target multiple law enforcement agencies on the federal, state, and local levels. Uvalde School's police chief, Pete Arredondo, refused to attend a school board meeting yesterday, saying he would not participate in his own illegal and unconstitutional public lynching. Arredondo did end up getting fired for his catastrophic handling of the shooting, which we have criticized numerous times on this show.
CNN's Shimon Prokopech reported on that school board meeting and what transpired. Let's watch.
Right. Last night, Jake, there was a school board meeting where they were listening to grievances that the community members, family members have against the superintendent. This over 3 hours. This meeting went on for over 3 hours, and it was all behind closed doors. And so family members couldn't listen to what was being discussed. And then there was just this level of frustration after the school board members came out and simply suggested some changes, that they would have a town hall before school started, that they would look into some of the police response, the school police response of that day. It wasn't enough for parents. You know, time and time again, I'm at these school board meetings, and time again, you leave these meetings and it's just, you get this sense that the parents are just not getting the answers that they want. There has been no accountability. Tomorrow there will be another school board meeting, Jake, where we expect that the police chief, the school police chief, will finally be fired. But that is still not 100% certain. But that is certainly on the agenda tomorrow night, and that is what the parents are expected. So we will hear more about that tomorrow night, Jake.
Shimon tweeted out that this is nowhere near done, and tonight there will be another school board meeting. It's kind of incredible with the kinds of things that people get fired for routinely, the kind of mistakes that are made that are so much less significant than what happened at Uvalde, that he's still in his position.
It's frustrating. It's not surprising. I mean, you talk about qualified immunity, you talk about the other protections that government employees have. You know, these are the people who work for us, they work for the taxpayers, and they are harder to get rid of when they screw up than, your average employee of any company. You do the slightest thing wrong, you can get fired. It happens to people all the time. It's often unjust, it's often wrong. These people trusted to keep children safe, failed horribly. I mean, we can, recount the failures here. Everyone's standing, the police officers standing in that hallway for an hour, hour and a half, while children have been murdered, are dying, bleeding on the floor, calling for help, calling 911 for help. We can see the security footage of them holding back, of the officer. They held back an officer whose wife was in the room dying, who had called him for help, and he draws his gun, and they hold him back. They hold him back and remove him, just as they held back all the parents outside.
Yes,
tackled, handcuffed.
Yeah.
One escaped, went in the school, got her kids out, got out. They're holding all these people back, and it'd be one thing if they're holding them back because they're doing something.
Right.
They're just holding them back for the sake of holding them back. They don't do anything.
There were multiple different kinds of law enforcement agencies on the scene. There was all the reporting about how they had a SWAT team and all of this military gear for this relatively small town, and none of that amounted to anything when it came down to their ability to save lives, which many observers have noted could have been saved if they had behaved differently in that moment. So, I think a lot of people are waiting with bated breath to see what the accountability actually will look like in this town. And it is frustrating that now, so many weeks, months out, that we're still waiting.
This whole thing is a good lesson in that just investing a community with more police resources, more law enforcement resources, which is an impulse I understand, given that crime is rising in some cities. There's a lot of concern about what's going on in the streets, et cetera. And I'm not for defunding the police, but you say, if you want to throw more money at the problem, or get them a fancy SWAT gear, get them a tank, get them all this stuff. Do they use that to stop actual danger, to stop actual violence, or do they use that to just harass people who, with the not wrong door raids, Briahna Taylor type stuff.
Yeah, or the beating that we talked about yesterday.
The beating we talked about yesterday,
in Arkansas. Yeah, look, I think this moment is really instructive because so often these conversations about policing pretend that one camp doesn't care about crime and another camp does care about crime. And I think that when we're talking about children, there's a little bit less of that. There's an acknowledgement that, of course, everybody wants the right outcome here. Nobody wants children dead, and these teachers as well. Nobody wants people to be punched randomly in the street, whether it's by people who have mental health issues or people who don't have mental health issues. Nobody wants to live in a city or anywhere where they're perpetually feeling apprehensive about crime. The real question is, what kinds of interventions are well calculated to actually improve conditions? And what we've seen in Uvalde and in so many places around the country is that simply throwing money at police forces doesn't actually do that. And whether it's a defender or an abolished person or someone who just wants criminal justice reform, the argument that people have been making for years is that we do have evidence about the kinds of interventions that do bring down crime, and it has to do with addressing some of these root causes, including mental health crises, including some kinds of community policing, and including potentially, when we look at this Uvalde case, and we'll see what happens down the line, but certain kinds of gun measures that prevent 18-year-olds, people who tend to want to go back to schools to do shootings because that's the environment that they're comfortable with because they're so young, from getting weapons of mass destruction.
Because in this case, you can't say, well, they needed better training. They had training. They had the exact training for how to handle a mass shooter situation, a training that has been honed over the last 20 years of these things.
Tragically.
They knew exactly how they were supposed to react. They were armed. They had the right equipment. There were tons of them. This school district had its own police force.
Yep.
And they just didn't do what they were supposed to do.
And this is why people say, you can't reform this. You don't have to agree with that thinking, but that is literally why so many, abolitionists or defunders say this is a system that can't be reformed, because at a certain point, there's no amount of kind of sensitivity training that can get to some of the structural reasons why police departments act in these ways, and some broader, I think, cultural qualities about some of these police forces. There was that image of the person with the Punisher screen on their phone, and I don't want to read too much into that sort of thing, but is there a culture that relishes the kind of vengeance that the Punisher represents, and a kind of do police forces attract the kind of people who are out to satisfy some kind of personal aggression as opposed to wanting to really be in a role of making communities safer?
Why don't we bring that aggression to the deranged teenager who was murdering children,
well, 'cause it's performative,
and not bring that aggression to the guy outside the CVS or the gas station or whatever it was yesterday who's unarmed and having his face bashed into the pavement.
Right. Well, I think it's because
let's channel that aggression toward keeping people safe.
Well, it's a performative shtick, and I think that probably in both instances, what you need is not aggression, but like strategic, analytical thinking about how to solve a problem, which I don't think is something that most police departments regretfully solve for.
Well, it probably makes a good argument for a class action lawsuit. This behavior from the police being so outside of what they were supposed to do. So obviously discordant from what they were trained to do, what they were instructed to do, what they were prepared to do. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll be following this.
And we'll have more Rising in Your Radar coming up next.
Indeed.